Good. Well, that was a good spring break, and now you know we're just full force until the end. So we got 5 lessons left, including today. And this is my favorite one. So actually, no, I know a lot of you said to me after we rounded the corner of the dark stuff, you're like, oh, you're back in your element, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, I give you all that because I feel like I need to, but I love it so much more when we get back to teaching the Bible and the more positive stuff going on. So I'm eager to get into this 3-part Revelation series. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So let's pray and we will proceed. Father, we glorify your name. We thank you for bringing us back together after a break. And I personally rejoice over what you did in my own heart on our trip and in the hearts of the women that I was with. It's been an absolute blessing to be in your land and to be doing that alongside of your people that I love so dearly. I pray that you will join us here today. You're more than invited. We ask you to not just sit here and be with us, but boy, to talk to us, to really take this word that we're going to be breaking apart and looking into deeply and cause it to do that thing in our hearts that only you can do, that thing that takes it out of our minds and makes it just an intellectual thing and turns it into something that changes us. So we can talk and teach all day long, but unless you do that work in our hearts, it's nothing. So we commit ourselves to you and love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I need to again welcome anyone who's joining us on video, which the last 2 times we've recorded the video to try to make up for bad ones did not work. The mic was bad, there was a lot of static, so this is the first time that people will be having an inserted lesson, at least for this year. So this is 2018, it's March, 20? I'm a little disoriented. So yeah, March 20, 2018, inserted into the stream of other ones that were all from 2016 and 17. So here we go into the book of Revelation. Are you ready? Most pastors that teach this will do it as a sermon series, so you're going to get 30-minute bites of it, and you do the best you can reviewing what you did last time or just trying to pick out different ideas from it. But here we get the privilege of doing this in 2-hour chunks. It's really going to make a difference, I think. How many of you have studied Revelation before at all? Okay. How many, okay, go the other way. How many have never really looked at the book of Revelation? Okay, fair amount of you. So I'm going to kind of do both. I'm going to try to ease those of you into it who know nothing about it, but also provide some things for those who are familiar with it that might be a little different way to look at it. I think you'll all do fine with it. Like everything, it's drinking from a fire hose. There's going to be a lot of water landing outside your sponge with this whole thing, but there will be some things that you get that I think will make a difference to you. So here's the thing about the book of Revelation, though. There have been hundreds, maybe thousands of commentaries written on this book. It seems like every person who teaches the Bible at all, especially if they teach New Testament, has their own impressions of what the book of Revelation means, and they like to, well, some of them like to tell people about it. So as I considered that, I thought, well, what business do I have, lowly me here at the chapel, what business do I have trying to tell you what my interpretation of Revelation is? Because some of it's different than anything you've heard before. And the fact is, well, I kind of believe that when I ask God to help me interpret the Word and when I spend time studying and learning, that He actually will teach me things. So I don't think any one person has the whole thing right all the time, but I think maybe it would be like God to use some woman somewhere that no one ever heard of to maybe come up against an understanding that's never been disseminated before. Really, nothing I'm saying is something I figured out myself. Well, maybe a couple things. Those I'll tell you when they are, because they're probably weird. But that's how it is. But, I do have ideas of how this fits together. When I first started this, there wasn't very much coherent about this book to me. And now it just is much more clear, to where I used to approach these lessons with some trepidation of, oh no, what do I think I'm doing? And now I'm pretty excited to kind of show you what I think is a cohesive view that doesn't really cheat very much. Most people that teach prophecy cheat Okay, the fact is, not everything works together coherently into one thing. I think it will one day. He's great that way. He ends up making it all work out in ways we didn't expect. But remember about prophecy. I've said this to you a few times. Remember how all the prophecies about the Messiah were like a mosaic tiles scattered in. You could only see him close up, right? But when you step back and you see it from our point of view, you can see Jesus all through there, right? I think future unfulfilled prophecy is that way. That when we get there, we'll see the whole picture of it. But at this point, we're kind of looking at little pieces and trying to fit them. And from our point of view, that's pretty hard to do. So I just want to communicate that there's really a lot of value in doing this, even though I'm saying I'm not sure we'll completely figure it out, you know? It's still really, really worthwhile to look into this, and I expect you'll love Jesus more through this process here. So there we go. I don't fit into anybody's real tidy system. I tend to think that systems, like I said, they cheat or they fudge things, or they're so conscious of trying to get a chart made that you kind of lose some of the other stuff. But there's some reasons that I do want to approach the book of Revelation with you. It's really what we're talking about is unfulfilled prophecy, and we're using Revelation as our launching pad sort of place. And so here's some reasons that I think this is worth doing. For one thing, Revelation is constantly using the Old Testament. I did not know this until I started this study, how many things are direct references to things from the Old Testament. So that's going to be the focus of how I teach you, is showing you, oh, here's something weird. What in the world would that mean? Well, let's look at the Old Testament and see that John, this book that John already knew really well, you know, he's drawing from this. He said these things this way on purpose because he has something else in his head. So we're going to try to introduce those to you as we go. I think this is a wonderful way to study the Old Testament, is by studying the book of Revelation. It's pretty fun. Another reason to do this is that apocalyptic prophecy, which is an end times prophecy, is very popular nowadays. If you want to study prophecy at all on your own and you go on the internet to do it, you're going to find yourself in these strange pockets of Christendom that usually, a lot of times, their websites look really weird. They just seem like, oh, I can't really recommend this to anybody. You know, when you see the way that they even present their material or their books or whatever. There's this subculture that doesn't feel like home to me, but it is where a lot of the prophecy teachers are landing right now. And I'll tell you, they have some really good things to point out. I've learned some things from them, but they also have things that I don't think are so good. And so really, because our culture and Christians in our culture are really interested in this nowadays, I feel like I want to be a little bit of a traffic cop for you, maybe helping direct some traffic to say, you know what, here's a solid place to look. I'm not even going to talk about specific individuals, but I think if you have the structure of what is helpful and what is not, you'll be able to recognize for yourself when somebody kind of goes off the other way. So just trying to give you some skills to navigate the weirdness that is the prophecy community of Christendom. All right, bless you. Another reason to teach is that because many of you are very curious about it. I sure was very curious about prophecy, and I think that capitalizing on your natural areas of curiosity is one of the best ways to get you studying the Bible. Did you know that when you want to have a quiet time with God, you don't have to pick something boring that you already know and regurgitate that again and again? If you have a question, if you have something you wonder about, something that makes you curious, boy, start there, you know? So this is an area where people are already curious. Let's maximize that. Let's use that to our advantage, right? You're going to see also as we go through Revelation that there are a lot of concepts in there that directly relate to things that I've taught you in this study. We've spent now 16 lessons laying some foundation things, building on the foundation really. But as we go back to those lessons, especially the divine counsel one where God gave away the nations and he's going to get them back, there's some stuff in Revelation about that is really, really exciting. So I mean, we have to do this. You have to see this in there and rejoice over it with me. I just need friends to do this with me, okay? Yeah. I also think that if I did not do this about prophecy, you would all be asking me, because along the way, haven't you wondered, like, how's this going to end up? how does this affect this or that other thing? And so those would come up in Q&A times, or they would come up in one-on-one. You just ask me an offhand question, and I wouldn't be able to give you the full picture in just a couple of minutes. So I think it's better if I just present you the full picture as I have it and let those questions get answered along the way. So I think it's a better way to do it properly instead of kind of hit and miss with one or two here and there sometimes, because you would ask me these questions if I didn't present them to you. So the last reason, there's probably more, but of the ones I have written down here, I think that for me, Revelation is a big piece of helping me keep my perspective on what God is doing, what He is trying to accomplish, instead of so much always thinking about myself and my own little life and how I'm supposed to do something great for God. I'm supposed to do, it's really about, I want to participate with what God is doing in this world. And when you see how Revelation is laid out and how God is very clear about what He's done and what He's going to do, it's just that bigger picture of I'm part of this much bigger thing, and it really, really makes a difference in how I think. When I see how Revelation fulfills a lot of Old Testament stuff, I see God getting His way. I see His brilliance in designing this plan that will come to fulfillment. And I just think that the whole approach of being motivated by being part of what God's doing is much better for me than guilt over what I'm not doing. Okay? Stuff I'm not doing that I should be doing or could be doing or that other people do or whatever. You know what? I'm about God's business. And this is just provides that perspective for me, along with some of the other things that we've talked about too. So Revelation has 22 chapters in it. We're going to take 3 lessons to get through. I'm giving you both a bird's eye view, and then we're diving in for a landing on certain things. This cannot ever be a comprehensive, every weird detail in Revelation gets explained to you fully. It can't be that. There's not enough time, and I don't know all those answers. But I will kind of come in for a landing on certain topics to explain it to you. But yeah, I'm really going to show you that anytime it gets weird, we got something we can look back at from before to help explain it, okay? I'll give you some of those different observations that I have that I think makes it all more coherent, and I think we're going to have a good ride here. So I hope you got your homework done. You got my email, right? Telling you to do your homework? Okay. So I know this was a lot to read. 7 chapters is kind of a lot to read and summarize, but I hope that was a good exercise, and really it puts you in a place to be better prepared for what we're doing right now. So if you're watching the video, stop right now and go read chapters 1 through 7 of Revelation. Thank you. Okay. All right. So starting with chapter 1, verse 1, we have a problem. It says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave Him to show to His servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending His angel to His servant John, and so on. The things that must soon take place. Does any of you feel like 2,000 years is soon? I don't. I think that feels like a really long, long time. So right here we have a very big difference in how scholars interpret that word soon. Some will say, well, to the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, so it's only been 2 days to God, so He said soon. Well, He was talking to people, so I don't know that He would just use His own way of thinking if He's talking to human beings. He knows how we are. So I think my way to explain this is that the things that Revelation covers are the entire church age. We usually interpret this to be all future unfulfilled. I think some of it has already been fulfilled at the very beginning of it. Once we get through the letters, you'll be seeing this today, just in a short time. I think it's showing the whole church age, which guess what? That was all set in motion. Certainly in John's time that he's writing this, right? So some of the things that begin to happen it was the beginning of it was right away from the time that this was given. It's just that it's a longer process than we expected. So you'll see that it's continuing to develop. Remember our birth pangs? Jesus said, as we come to the end, things are going to increase in frequency and intensity. We're going to see some more of that this morning, a parallel to that right here in Revelation. So I think soon actually does make sense if you think this age is beginning. That's going to end the way that it says this book will end, okay? It just takes a long time for it to play out that way. So John then continues his introduction. He starts to get a little bit excited about what Jesus has done for us. He's very, very clear that Jesus is God. John was always concerned about making the case in his gospel that Jesus is actually divine, that he's God. And so he continues with that. He's just gushing. It's really hard. You really have to twist John's writings to try to make the case that Jesus wasn't actually God, because he's trying to show us that, okay? And he does that again here in Revelation. Now, he starts to describe this vision that he received, and if you don't know the history on this, he was the only one of the apostles that wasn't actually martyred for his faith, although he was boiled in oil once and survived it, so I kind of think that counts. But here at the end of his life, he lived to be an old man, but he was exiled on the Isle of Patmos. And so while he was there, that was the time that he received this vision, which he was told to write this down for us so that we could have this. So it's a gift of God to give that to him. And so he's supposed to write it down for 7 specific churches. They're all listed. They each have their own little letter. You saw those if you did your homework. And really, all scholars agree that the number 7 in the Bible refers to completeness. It's a significant number. So when this letter is going to 7 churches, that is an indication to us that it's not just about those 7 churches. It's a complete thing for the whole church. Okay, so John sees the speaker. Somebody's talking to him, and he describes this person in great detail. And but it's not until verse 18, after all this stuff that he says, that we can tell that this is Jesus. And the way that we know it's Jesus is he says, I'm the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Okay? So it's pretty clear that this person who's been speaking, that he's talking about in glowing terms, is Jesus. So here's what it says in Revelation 1:13-15. I saw one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white wool, like snow. What color is his hair? White, okay? His eyes were like a flame of fire. What are his eyes like? Fire. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace. What are his feet like? Bronze. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. What's his voice like? Water. Okay, I know it's hard to read a passage and grasp all that. That's why I'm pulling this out, because I want to take you to the Old Testament. Daniel saw a vision of the throne of God, and it says this in Daniel 7:9. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. So Daniel's like grasping for the way to describe his vision of God, and he kind of uses the same terminology in some ways. But it gets even more interesting. This is a little teeny bit of a rabbit trail, but I think this is very powerful, so I want to give this to you. If we go ahead in Daniel just a little bit to chapter 10, there's a man that appeared to Daniel, and this is his description of that man. I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. Oh wait, Revelation. Jesus in Revelation has this gold sash, whether it's a sash like this or a belt or not. So this guy in Daniel has the same kind of gold belt or sash as Jesus does in Revelation. His body was like beryl, like a jewel. His face like the appearance of lightning. His eyes like flaming torches. Oh, that's the same exact thing. His arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. Same thing. And the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Well, John said it sounds like roaring water, roar of many waters, right? So Daniel's description of this man that came to him, boy, it's really close to John's description of Jesus. Now, do you think John knew Daniel? Any good Hebrew boy would grow up learning Daniel's prophecies. If John intended to describe someone other than this person that Daniel saw, I think he would have tried to give a little bit of distinction in the description. Instead, his description sounds almost like an exact match here. Now, here's why scholars don't usually pull this out. It's because this guy in Daniel was prevented from coming to Daniel for 23 days after Daniel asked for help from God, right? And he says, I tried to come to you, but it took me 23 days, okay? Now that sounds problematic. How could Jesus not have been able to get there for 23 days, right? Like isn't God all powerful and able to do? Well, if it's an angel, that's still a problem. Do you understand? If God sent his angel to Daniel and it took him 23 days, it doesn't matter if it's an angel sent by God under the authority of God or if it's Jesus. It still has a little problem there of why did it take so long. Do you see that? Okay, so I can't fully answer the question for you, but I think our divine counsel worldview lends some little bit of understanding to that. What did God do with the nations back at the Tower of Babel? What did he do? Gave them away. He disinherited them and he gave them stewards, sons of God, to be their stewards, their authorities. It was legal. When Satan said, if you bow down and worship me, Jesus, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. And Jesus didn't go, you idiot, they're mine already. No, he didn't correct him. He knew that they were in the hands of the enemy. So Daniel here is in Persia. It's now Medo-Persia, it used to be Babylon. And he's in a foreign land under the authority of a foreign god by God's design, right? And so the way I see it, Jesus had to get a visa. Or something. He does things properly all the time. He doesn't just undo things that he does first. And so I don't know why it would take that many days or anything about the details of that. But it's not problematic for me. It means that God makes a rule and then he respects his own rule. Okay? So the point being for Revelation here is we've got a description of someone appearing to Daniel that I think there is the second person of the Trinity, okay, appearing to Daniel, because it matches what he says about Jesus here in Revelation 1. I just think that's really cool. That whole thing about finding Jesus in the Old Testament is a whole year of study you could do or more. It's just a fascinating thing. So there you go. That was just a little teaser for getting you interested in something there, okay? All right, so John sees this Jesus who's been glorified, and he has a pretty dramatic reaction, and then he learns some more things. So this is how it goes in Revelation 1, 17 to 20. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, "Fear not. I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this." So Jesus is even saying some of this is now, and some of this is going to take place later. This is a progression of things that this writing is going to cover. "As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." Okay? Got it? Figure that one out? Okay. It's very highly significant in here that Jesus is the one who holds the keys of death and Hades. What are keys for? Opening or closing, right? Letting people in or out. Jesus is the one who has that power. That's really good for us to know, right? There's some places in Scripture that just reveal things that now we take for granted, but then we go, well, how do we know that? Well, guess what? It's really, really clear here that Jesus is the one who holds those keys now. That's a happy thing. All right, so we can't address all of the strange details here. The 7 lampstands and 7 stars, their meanings are given here, although it still raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? It says the stars are angels of 7 churches, and it says the lampstands represent the 7 churches themselves. So remember how God gives a visual illustration for things that are spiritual truths? Well, that's what he's doing here. I think some of it's lost in the culture, that we don't fully get that culture and how that imagery would have been important to the first century churches receiving this. So when we see something weird like that we don't get, we go, I bet I could find out more. And I bet that meant something to the reader, or John would have maybe not acted like they ought to know what he's talking about. He does that quite a lot, by the way. I think all the biblical authors kind of do that. So anyway, John does not really explain why each church has an angel. I'm curious about that. Does God give every church an angel that's responsible for that church in some way? Some people think the angels stands for the elders, the human elders of the church. I actually don't think that works out very well. I think we are talking about Elohim somehow assigned with some measure of responsibility for the churches. But the thing to notice is that the angels seem to be the ones responsible for what gets addressed to the churches. They bear some measure of responsibility along with that church for what Jesus is about to tell them. So that's a bit mysterious to me, but it's worth pointing out and observing there. So what happens is then we get this whole list in chapters 2 and 3 of the letters that go to every one of the churches. And so this is another place where scholars have different opinions about what is actually symbolized by these churches. Some take it only entirely literally and say these are 7 historical churches in what is now Turkey. They're in the direction that a courier would have gone from where John was on Patmos, all around and back down, okay? So they're all in order. They're literal churches that existed at the time in those cities, okay? And each of those places should listen to what Jesus said to them in these letters. Some scholars would say that there are preachers. I don't know what scholars do, but preachers have all different things they say, okay? They describe different spiritual conditions of local churches since the time of Christ. So one church might be lukewarm like Laodicea. One church might have lost their first love. One church might be totally still on fire for Christ, right? What's the chapel? Where does the chapel land in that? So you might want to do that with it. Some say that they describe the spiritual conditions of individual believers. You or me, am I lukewarm or am I on fire for Christ? Which church matches me the best, kind of thing. And then of course the implication is, let's be the one that loves Jesus wholeheartedly, right? And then some say that you can actually trace the historical progression of the church from the early days of it and show how each letter kind of shows the historical progression 1 through 7, so that now we're in the Laodicea times, we're in the lukewarm era of the church. I actually have a problem with that, but I don't think we actually have to choose between these options. Yes, these were literal churches at the time. Yes, some churches have different characteristics. Yes, some individuals have characteristics of one or the other. There's certainly lessons to be learned from all of that. But always when we're interpreting, if the literal interpretation works, we should emphasize that, I think, that he really is talking to these particular places. It's not like fiction. He's not making these up. These were real places in the world. And so, I think the historical progression one actually has more trouble than the others, because you really can't define it quite that way, going 1 through 7 the way they appear in Revelation. It's really quite a stretch. So I don't particularly like that one a lot. Anyway, another reason to say, though, that this is about more than just those particular 7 places at that particular time, aside from the fact that it's the number 7, which indicates it's for more than that, is that the things that Jesus promises in these letters are certainly applicable to more than just the people in that place. So, for example, he says to the believers in Smyrna, if you overcome, you won't be hurt by the second death. Well, that's not only the believers in Smyrna that get that one, right? So I think all of these, you can't just only apply to one physical geographical location. These are promises to all believers. So I do think it's about more than just the literal, but certainly start with the literal. Now, I want to just land a little bit for a few minutes on these things that Jesus promised. I have these underlined in all the letters in my Bible. The one who conquers, and then whatever it says about the one who conquers. It is my opinion that Revelation 2 and 3, especially, 1, 2, and 3 really, should be studied by the church as much as any other New Testament book. I kind of wish John had made it like 1 John 4, or 4th John, I'll put it that way, okay? Instead of putting this into the book of Revelation, I'll leave God the ability to decide how he wants his book organized. But I say that because I think that we avoid the amazing truth that is in these chapters because it's connected to all that weird stuff that is harder to get. But these things in here that Jesus promises to those who overcome are some of the most exciting, profound truth of all the Bible. When you think about this, in John chapter 17, Jesus prays for the believers, right? And then he goes on in that prayer and he prays for those who will believe in the future. He's praying for you and me. He's showing his heart for his church in John chapter 17. There's no other place in the Bible except these letters where Jesus shows his heart for the church like that. So if you want to know how Jesus feels about you, read Revelation 2 and 3 more often, okay? Let this soak in. Let me just skim through, just pulling these out of these letters of what you get if you overcome. The one who overcomes, I will grant him to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Imagine that. He will not be hurt by the second death. I will give him some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. That's an ownership and a belonging statement there. It's beautiful. I will give him authority over the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. That's quite profound. We're going to come back to that. But, wow, we have co-rulership with Jesus when we overcome. I will give him the morning star. Have you ever wanted the morning star? I don't even know what that means, but but he promised it to us, okay? I will give him the morning star. He will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot his name out of the book of life. Do you ever fear that you're going to stand before God all ashamed? You are clothed in white garments, overcomer. Your name is in the book of life. You are his. Like, this is huge. Do you get this? Probably not. Do you get it a little more than you used to? Okay, I hope after today, it's even just a little bit more. This is amazing. He says, I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. That is a divine council, a little sneak peek in there. When the whole divine council, all of God's angels are gathered together, he's telling them our names. He's introducing us, and guess what? We outrank them at that point. Don't you know you will judge angels? All that. He is presenting us in a place of honor in his family council. Okay. Did you get it? Okay. I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Oh my word, I can't even pull that apart. Having just been in Jerusalem, like the whole New Jerusalem thing is like, whoa, okay, how cool. But never go out of it. A pillar in the temple. Remember how we talked about us being stones, living stones in the very temple of God, his very dwelling place? Here he even like takes it up a notch. You're a pillar in it. Well, the pillars are the beautiful parts of the stuff, right? They're perfectly round carved and beautiful, top, bottom. We're like decoration and support. We're not just like a lowly little rock here that we're dressing it up. This is the place God lives, and we're making it. It's made out of us. It's so incredible. Okay, never shall he go out of it. Like, this is permanent. We're with him forever. This place where God resides is us. Does that just mean more than it did before after talking about the dwelling place of God and what we are? Okay. You can see I get excited. I will grant him to sit on my throne. I can't even conceive of that, but here we go. So yeah, there's a whole lot more in these letters, these 7 letters. Definitely study them and read them. But I really want you to just be overwhelmed by what Jesus is offering to us and what he wants for us and how he sees us. He is not seeing us as lowly, worthless people who should have done something better, should have done something else. We are dearly loved adornments of his temple, all right, with white robes on. Okay. Well, we're going to move into Revelation 4. And in order to, it's really quite a shift in the action here. John starts to describe a different section of the vision. Things, I think it's talking about things that actually happened right here in this particular chapter. So let's look at this. One of the main differences in how people interpret Revelation is whether it's chronological or not. Do the events flow sequentially from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next? Or are they simultaneous? So a lot of scholars will say that the bowls, the trumpets, and the seals are all kind of talking about the same thing. Others say that they flow out of each other. And my interpretation, after trying hard to go different ways, is that it is largely chronological. I think there are a couple points that will come against next week and the week after that actually expand out on a larger time period. And so I'll show you what those are. But I think most of the way, starting here in chapter 4, after the letters are done, we're looking at sequential events. So I'm taking that road with it. That's different than what you'll read from other people sometimes, but it is my conclusion, and you're here in my class, so you get it my way. That's why you should all teach your own class. No, I'm just kidding. But I really do think it works better to have it be mostly chronological, unless logically it looks different there, and I'll show you where that happens, okay? So John chapter 4, or Revelation chapter 4, opens up with John having this view of the throne room of God. And so here is how, Ezekiel had one of these experiences, and here's how Ezekiel started out his vision of the throne room of God. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. And this is how John says it, Revelation 4:1. After this I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. So they both kind of start their experience with it looking like heaven is opening to them. And then John really does his best to describe this remarkable sight of seeing God sitting on a throne, which how could you even describe that in words? I'm having trouble telling you about a 2-week trip I just had in words, okay? Just seeing like trees and land and ground and buildings and stuff like that. How in the world could you ever use words to describe the throne room of God if you were given a peek of it? But they all try. So we're going to look at their attempts, their best attempts at letting us into what they saw with their eyes. So this is how Isaiah described his experience. This should be familiar to you. Isaiah 6 verses 1 and 4. I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, and the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. So you get an earthquake and smoke, and like something profound is happening here, right? Well, here's how Ezekiel did his best to try to describe it to us. And above the expanse over their heads of the living creatures, there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of the throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, do you see how he keeps trying to say it looked like this, but it wasn't exactly this? He's trying to make a non-human being look like a, as best you can, like a man. So he says, upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire, and closed all around. So here I picture like if you had a glass case with fire inside of it, it would look like bronze, wouldn't it? Like from the outside. So he's seeing like a body that looks like it has flames for skin almost. I think that's kind of cool. Hunger Games, right? We can, okay. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness around him. Like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, a rainbow, so was the appearance of the brightness all around. So there's a lot of light that has multiple colors in it. That would be so beautiful, wouldn't it, to see? And then, okay, so Daniel sees a vision of God, and here's how he tried to describe it. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire. A stream, their thrones, this is ancient Near East stuff, that the thrones had wheels. So that's something weird to us, but that's how they always pictured them and built them. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. So we got this fire imagery again. Yeah.
All these references to fire, I always associated fire with hell. Is there a correlation, or why is there fire in heaven? Holiness, beauty. It's like it's light and brightness, and I think it's about God's holiness mostly. More like a candle fire as opposed to a house burning. Well, it's certainly not a destructive fire. It's life fire. I mean, fire is a weird thing anyway, isn't it? What is it even? So I think it's mysterious. It's the best they can do to come up with it. But the fires of hell, when you think of that, are about destruction and ending, right? This is about eternity. So yeah, the fire itself is not the punishment. It's the destruction and the death. Okay?
Maybe like Moses on the burning bush.
That's that's a really good thing to refer to.
Wasn't consumed.
Yeah, this is not a consuming fire. It's the angel touches Isaiah's lips with the burning coal to purify him. So you just think of that whole idea of purification and holiness, and that's what I get from it. Okay? All right, so we've gotten Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel's attempts. So now let's look at John's attempt here in Revelation 4. At once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven with one seated on the throne. Could be the same, right? And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. I think what we're supposed to get here is it's the same God. Okay? It's the same God as those Old Testament prophets were trying to describe. He hasn't changed. It's the same guy. It's not some other God. We're talking about Yahweh, this particular God who is in charge of all creation. So there's some weird stuff in here. John sees 4 living creatures. It says that they're full of eyes. That just seems weird. If you wanted to draw that, it would look bizarre to us. Each one looks like either a lion, an ox, a man, or an eagle. So there's a lot of things that are suggested about what these represent. Some say it's, the diversity of the animal kingdom, that God's in charge of all the animals and creatures of the whole world. I have no problem with that, because he is. Okay. Some say that it's the 4 main seasonal constellations in the sky. So he's in charge of all space and time. I actually like that better, and I think it may have some ancient Near Eastern corollaries there, that they believed in these, they knew these constellations and would have referred to them by these animals. So I think that has some credibility to it. But what we need to see here, for sure, as much as those things are weird, we're supposed to get the point that God's glory and power transcend everything. He is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, over all, everything, okay? Ancient of Days, all of that stuff. So these creatures are continually bowing before God, giving thanks to Him, giving Him glory. And we've got these 24 elders too. Again, differing opinions about these. Some think that 12 are the apostles and 12 are the Old Testament, like the tribes, okay? So we're getting the Old and New Testament together, and they represent all humanity. I think that's a fair enough example or explanation for it. I don't exactly know. I've just seen, when you see 100 different ones, you go, as if I'm going to just, be able to tell you what it is. I'd rather just assemble different options than have to pick one sometimes, but I think the idea is God has glory over everything. He's in charge of all. And if we just get that as we read it, we can hold the other interpretations pretty loosely and not be too worried about what it all is. Well, the elders are casting their crowns before the throne. That's an expression of submission, right? They were given authority, but they're taking their authority and saying, I give it to you. I want your way, God. So that should be all of our posture, right? And so they make this really, really important declaration. This is in verse 11 of chapter 4. Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. Here's why. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. So on what basis, at this point in John's vision, is everybody worshiping God? Like, what are they praising Him for? Creator. All of creation is relating to God as their creator. Okay? Awesome. That is one way that we relate to God, right? In the next chapter, we're going to find real soon that they start to sing a new song. Okay? And it implies that this declaration they're making, that you're worthy because you're creator, that it's done as a song. It's a cry of their hearts kind of thing, crying out towards God. It's how the human properly relates to the creator. It's basically, you're worthy of worship because you made all things, including us. Okay? So you're in charge. Awesome. That's how it should be. Well, the fact that God is so completely worthy makes chapter 5 a little confusing when it starts out. Did you think this when you were reading it? Like, there's this scroll, and there's nobody who's worthy to open the scroll. Well, if God is so worthy, why is it so much trouble to open the scroll? Why is there nobody worthy to open it? And John is even weeping because there's nobody that could be found who can open the scroll. Did you wonder why? Well, we know it should be Jesus. We know it's going to be Jesus because you read the book, right? So why isn't Jesus worthy to open the scroll at this point in John's vision? Anyone?
You're just talking about humans, maybe, to open the scroll?
Well, yeah, certainly none of the humans are worthy, but wouldn't Jesus have been there? It actually says there's nobody found in heaven or on earth or under the earth that was worthy to open the scroll or look into it. So John starts to weep because there's no one worthy.
Is it because at this point in Revelation, Jesus hasn't been the slain lamb?
Huh. You've taken my class before. Yes, okay. No.
What was the answer?
Okay, no, don't worry. This is really important. I'm going to make sure I take you along on this point really carefully, okay? Normally, the whole book of Revelation, after you get to those letters, is all seen to be future. That this vision John had of the throne room of God is all something that happens in the future. No, my point here is I believe John was taken just a little bit back in time from his lifespan to the point where all creation only could relate to God as creator. And then we're going to find the lamb appears looking as if it's been slain. And now we have someone who's worthy to open the scroll. Okay? I think Jesus may be ascending to heaven at this point because there's no one worthy in heaven, under heaven. You know, the only place not mentioned is that spot between earth and heaven. So maybe the lamb just appears after this and he's worthy. So I think John's vision took him just a little bit back to right before the crucifixion or right before Jesus got to heaven, one or the other, and that then what he's allowed to witness here is the transfer from the old covenant to the new covenant. Okay? Remember we talked about covenants? Covenants are a way that humans relate to God based on his initiative. Okay? Did I lose you? I'm not seeing eyes. Okay? Covenants are the way that man can relate to God because God did something and made some promise, right? Or did some action. And so before, the way you could relate to God was you're my creator, you're worthy because you're my creator. Now, they start to sing a new song. And this is in Revelation 5, 9, and 10. Let's look at what the new song is. Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. So now there's a new way that humans relate to God as Redeemer, right? As the one who died for us. This is very much church language. When you see tribe, language, people, nation, church. Always think church when you see that. That's going to come in handy in a little bit yet this morning. Okay, so huge thing here. I mean, it is such a big deal if you read this. Everybody starts like joining in. Everybody in heaven starts praising God for what they're witnessing here. That's something awesome. So everybody's saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Sing it, Kathy. It's one of the best parts of the whole Messiah is the worthy is the Lamb who was slain. I mean, it's like it needs to be grand, glorious music here. This is what's happening in heaven when we hear it, okay? Jesus did something remarkable here, okay? And all of heaven is rejoicing over it. And John got to witness what that looked like in heaven when the changeover was made. That's cool, okay? So I think he's looking at the past right here, not at the future in this particular place. And so that influences what I think happens next, which is a huge point of where I divert from the pre-trib position, okay? The classic pre-trib position says that the seals, that when Jesus opens the seals here in chapter 6, that happens in the tribulation period, which is a future period of 7 years, according to this, okay? 7 years in the future sometime, the very last 7 years before Jesus comes to reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Oh, and by the way, before that 7 years begins, the church is raptured, okay? Then the seal judgments, then the trumpet judgments, and then the bowl judgments. And what I'm suggesting to you, here's the really big thing, is that it doesn't say that Jesus waited to start opening the seals. There's nothing in there that says there's a 2,000-year gap. Could there be? Does prophecy sometimes work that way? Yes, we must acknowledge. Remember the mountain peak illustration? The prophets could only see the peaks. They couldn't see those big long valleys in between. So it could be that this is in the very distant future from John's vision, okay? But it also could be that Jesus started opening those puppies right away, okay? And when we look at them, what we find is that the first 5 seals are not God pouring out his wrath on the earth. Okay? That is why people think that the seals have to go into the tribulation, as they say, well, these are all judgments of God. The first 5 seals are not judgments of God. They're all things people are doing to each other. Probably under the influence of the devil and his cohorts, right? Okay, so the first 5, we're going to talk about what they are, and you will see this. All of the first 5 are things men do to other men, okay? People to people. There does not have to be a time gap. And what I'm suggesting to you is that everything we talked about 3 weeks ago, about the birth pains, when Jesus said, as you come to the end of the age, wars will increase, famines will increase, all these things that we looked at, it's like labor pains. They increase in frequency and intensity. I'm going to suggest to you that the first 5 seals are the same things. They're the labor pains that match what Jesus told us, okay? And that they've been opened and are progressing. And then we'll see that seal number 6 is super, super different and really important for, I think, interpreting what comes right after that. All right? And that's all stuff we still get to do this morning. I'm not going to make you wait another week. All right? We're really heading into this here. Aren't you glad? Like, I don't want to wait for this. I just think this is so exciting. Okay. So the first 4 seals are each pictured, symbolized by a rider on a different color of horse, which just makes it all the more confusing because now we're definitely in symbolic language, right? So let me just tell you what they are first, and then you're going to wonder, well, what do you think they are? And I'm going to say, well, lots of people think they're all different things, but if I'm correct that these have been opened a long time ago, 2,000 years ago, and are increasing in frequency and intensity, it's not going to be that hard to figure them out. Okay, so the first one is a white rider. The horse is white. The rider has a bow. He's given a crown. What does a crown mean? Power to rule. And he's conquering people. But he doesn't seem to be using military means to conquer. In the Bible, what is the symbol of a military conquest? What kind of weapon? Sword. This guy does not have a sword. He has a bow. Doesn't seem to have any arrows, at least not that are mentioned, okay? So he's ruling people some other way than conquering them militarily, this person on the white horse, okay? Or this entity that is symbolized by a person on a white horse, we'll put it that way. The red rider then comes next, and he takes peace from the earth. People are slaying each other. This guy gets a sword. Now we're talking about war, right? Then there's the black horse, and this is about economic imbalance. When you read it, basically what's happening is it costs more to eat, for one person to eat, than what you can earn in a day. So economic imbalance. And then the last one is a pale horse. The Greek word there indicates a greenish color. So chloros, it's got a green hue to it. I don't know if that matters to you, but now you know, pale green, okay. And in this one, death and Hades are given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill them through war, famine, disease, or wild beasts. And so when you get into the prophecy community, everybody's going to have their ideas about some things in the future during the tribulation, that these are each going to be events that happen. The white rider will do this. Most people think it's the Antichrist. Then the red one is going to be, there's going to be this massive war. And then the black one, there's going to be an economic crisis kind of thing. And then the pale one's going to come, and 1/4 of the earth in one plague is going to drop dead. Okay, so it's all put into like all events in the future. And I think prophecies often have multiple fulfillments, and so I'm not going to write off the idea that these are events. But if we present them as birth pains that have been going on and are just getting worse and worse, this is how I would interpret them, okay? The white rider would have come on the scene almost immediately after the time of Christ, when the Gnostic religion actually took those ideas from ancient Babylon that we've talked about so much, all the mystery religion, mixed the mystery religion with Christianity. Okay? I would say this is the Roman Catholic system in part, maybe other cults and false religions also. I would call the White Rider false religion in the name of Christ. That looks good, right? Looks like it's good to people. I think this corresponds with when Jesus said, he said, many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and will lead you astray. So I think it's the same birth pain that he mentioned there is what the white rider is. The word that he conquers and continues, or what does it say there? He conquers and will conquer. Conquering and to conquer. This wording here is the idea that something is set in motion that continues for a long time. It's not just completed, it's not just one quick conquest. This is something where it's a process of conquering. And if we look at, say, the Roman system or false religion in the name of Christ, look how much power they've had over the earth, but not through military conquest. They're conquering people through their hearts, through their beliefs, through deception. Looks good, looks all white and pure, doesn't it? But it's false. And so I think that is what this is talking about, false religion in the name of Christ have conquered many, many, many souls without a sword, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. The Red Rider then would represent all the wars that Jesus said would happen more and more. Remember we looked at the frequency of them, how there's more wars per year than there ever was before, that kind of thing. The Black Rider would indicate economic disparity. Have you noticed? We talked about it in lesson 12 about the whole economic system. Have you noticed that a very small percentage of people control most of the world's wealth? Okay? 1%. Yes, 1% controls half is basically what I've heard recently. Okay? So, I mean, has this not been progressing to this point all along since the time of Christ? So I think eventually, yes, it will get to the point, and it is in some places where you can't even earn your food for the day. So I just don't see this as something that has to wait to happen. This is evil people put this burden on other people, right? So I think these first four are pretty clear. The pale one is interesting too, because like I said, people say this is an event in the future where a quarter of the Earth's population all die. Well, it doesn't actually say in the description that this entity or person actually kills a quarter. It says he has authority over them to kill them in all these different ways. And it mentions, I want to get it right, I want to read it. Violence, famine, disease, and wild beasts, right? The language of wild beasts there allows it to be pathogenic things like malaria mosquitoes and little parasites and things like that, okay? Do you know that if we took the world's population, 1/4 of our world would be in what we call third world countries, okay? That are heavily dominated and oppressed by wealthier nations. Do you know we could end world hunger very quickly and if strategy were applied and goodness were applied to it? But no, the rich of the world want to dominate and exploit these people. And so they leave these poor people in conditions where they die of malaria like flies, and it could be solved. Do you understand? We're in this. I don't see us having to wait and have it all happen in one day that 1/4 of the people die. I think it's happening. We're oppressing, and we have, the rich have authority over 1/4 of the world right now. So you wonder why I think Jesus is coming soon. I think these are at the point that he described here. So there you go. I think it's incredible. Now, the 5th seal is a little different. It's not a guy and a horse. It's not pictured that way. This is pictured with different imagery. It says this in chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. Do you remember Jesus said in the end days there'd be martyrdoms, that people will hate you and persecute you and even kill you for the sake of my name? Remember how we looked at how there's more people being martyred today than ever before? Okay, I think this is right here. Since the time of Stephen, Christians have been killed for their faith, and it's stacking up. Now, do you think these martyrs seem like, oh, they just died this year, and they're, God, when are you going to avenge our blood? You sort of get the feel, don't you? Especially the way I read it dramatically. How long? And then he says, just wait a little bit longer. I very much get the idea that there's some impatience going on here because it's been a long time. Most pre-trib interpreters would say that these are people who were killed during the tribulation under the Antichrist system. I'm suggesting to you that these are the martyrs from all along since Stephen, stacking up. I don't think their souls are really kept captive under the altar. Do you remember after Cain killed Abel, God said, Abel's blood is crying out from the ground to me, okay? God said that about Abel's blood. Somehow, the blood of an innocent person in the ground, it makes a noise to God, okay? I think that's the same thing that's happening here. I don't think those poor people are like in some kind of bondage and actually feeling impatient. We're getting symbolic imagery here to say there is unfinished business yet, and God knows this. Now let's look back at the Old Testament and get just a little more glimpse of this, because this is pretty cool. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, there's this law that if you're walking along, minding your own business, and you stumble across a murdered person, that would be a horrible day, wouldn't it? Okay, and nobody can figure out who murdered that person. The community is supposed to take a bull down to a river, flowing water, and they are to kill the bull as a sacrifice. And the expressed purpose for this sacrifice is to cleanse the land because it has been defiled by the shedding of innocent blood. So there's our second time that we've seen that when somebody innocent is murdered, the land is defiled. Okay? Which part of the earth is defiled now from the shedding of innocent blood? Pretty much all of it, right? Okay. The sacrifices have not been made to cleanse it. How many abortions are we doing a year? Just in our country? The land is crying out for God to avenge it. Do you understand? Something has to be done to clean up this defiled place. And that's exactly what these martyrs are saying. How long before you avenge our blood? They know that in God's righteousness and holiness that something is demanded to cleanse this. Guess what we're going to find when we get into the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments? There's going to be a lot of blood being poured out on the earth. It's probably not random. God's going to be avenging the earth with blood plagues to cleanse the earth and make it habitable again. Okay. You got to wait for next week for some of that. Okay. Anyway, so I think it's really fascinating that what we're seeing is that these souls are now given white robes. See? So here's a white robe, just a little bit longer. Okay? How would a soul put on a robe? You can't even pick it up, right? I like to think, and I think I'm right, that these people are about to be resurrected. They're given their robe because guess what? The resurrection's about to happen. Okay? We know from Paul that the resurrection of the dead is the same as the rapture of the living church, right? The dead go just a little bit before us. In the twinkling of an eye, the sound of the last trump, the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together to be with the Lord forever. Okay? It's the same kind of event that the resurrection happens. So if we see these souls being handed their white robes to put on to their new bodies that they're about to get, I would expect that maybe what we would see happening next would have something to do with the rapture here in the book of Revelation, if it is indeed chronological. So let's see if we can proceed forward and find this, okay? Have I totally lost you? Are we okay? Okay. I know it's a lot. This is a thing you're going to want to go back and reread. You're going to want to reread Revelation and grasp some of these things. I don't think they're too hard for you. I trust you to be able to get them, but I know I'm given. This is a lot of information and maybe different than you've heard. But I think when we get to the sixth seal, we're at a really, really crucial turning point. Something very different is happening here, okay? Each of the other seals that we talked about, 1 through 5, they each got 1 to 3 verses of description of what's happening with them. This one gets a chapter and a half of what happens after this seal is opened. It's pretty big deal. And so we're going to spend the rest of we have 1 hour left. We're going to spend the rest of it talking about the rest of Revelation 6 and then chapter 7. That's as far as we'll get this morning, okay? And so, definitely going back to the Old Testament to look at how some of that informs this. We've got some exciting things ahead today. And so here's the description of the sixth seal as told by John in his vision, verses 12 to 17. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became blood, like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. That's a big earthquake, okay? Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone slave and free hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who's seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? I can hardly even read that without stopping and going, look at this, look at this, look at this. Okay, so now we got to go back and look at all the pieces. There were so many things in here. It just seems weird to you right now, but we're going to make sense of this because really important stuff in here. So unlike the first 5 that can be interpreted quite well as increasing in frequency and intensity, right? This one is a certain event, very clearly, right? You can't have an earthquake prolonged over 2,000 years and have it do these things for a long period of time. This is an event that happens here very clearly. It involves a massive earthquake and several things happening in the sky. Every single person on earth is crying out for the mountains and rocks to fall on them because they're terrified. They're being shown the face of the one who sits on the throne, and they're terrified. Okay, every person, it says slave or free. You're one or the other. A lot of the words were about the rulers, kings of the earth, great ones, generals, rich, powerful. But then it goes, everyone slave and free. Every single person on the face of the earth is upset and crying out. They just want to die. They're terrified about seeing God. Is that our posture before God when we see him? Are any of you like me, you're really looking forward to seeing your Lord face to face? Okay, do you think that when we see him for the first time, shows himself, we're going to be like, oh, just kill me, I can't stand, I can't bear to see. No, we're his kids, okay? We're in a whole different standing here. So what this says to me, adding on to that little detail of those guys just getting their robes so they're about to get their bodies, there can't be a believer right here on earth right now at this instant in the book of Revelation. I think believers have been pulled off of the planet and are now with God, and everybody who's left, God has revealed himself that this now is the day of my judgment, is beginning right now. It says it. The great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Right? So something new is happening here. Now, it's kind of interesting. When Jesus rose from the dead and other people rose from the dead with him, there was a huge earthquake, right? Okay. In Revelation 11, we'll see when we get there that there's 2 witnesses who will be killed, and then when they are risen from the dead, there's a big earthquake. If you want to read more about this, I have a book in your footnote of a guy that I'm actually in an email group with. He's a really good thinker. And he makes a case, he harmonizes the gospel accounts to show that the resurrection happened, or the earthquake happened at the resurrection, and surmises that perhaps when a human gets a new body, there's some kind of physical reaction that happens on the earth that causes an earthquake even, okay? So if you multiply that times millions of believers on the earth, plus the maybe billions of dead ones being raised at the same time, that could even be what sets off this whole 6th seal business of the whole earthquake that's so big it moves mountains and islands and all of that. You know, it's like God, when you look at Lot being rescued from Sodom and Gomorrah, as judgment is coming down, Lot is rescued. Noah, as the rain is going to start, Noah gets put in a place of safety. I think this is how God behaves towards his people that he is preserving. And so I just find this as a very interesting possibility. Now, I like to think about maybe the scientific things that are happening to cause these things. If you picture the Earth, if the south pole of the Earth got grabbed by something that had a lot of strong gravity or magnetic pull or whatever you want to say, the Earth would shift like that. If the Earth shifted at all, it would cause exactly what's being described here. It's a big if. It's just a thing to think about. But right now, like the sun, as it pulls on the Earth, creates a bulge at the equator, at the part that's closest to the sun. There's sort of a bulge there. So if the Earth shifted like that, that bulge would flatten and a new one would form where the sun is now pulling. Okay? That would just, imagine tidal waves. Imagine what that would cause on the Earth. You wouldn't even know who's alive and who's dead. The whole idea of believers being taken away in a rapture, you might not even know that that happened. Because so many people, like there's been so much catastrophe. I just think that's really interesting. Another thing about it, if you were on any place on the earth and it was nighttime and you saw all the stars in the sky, what would it look like if you went like that? It would look like the stars are all falling from the sky, wouldn't it? Vroom. Oh, that's what it says. It looks like like a fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. That's what the stars look like at this precise moment. So I just think, I don't know, I bring it up because I think when you start to talk about the scientific means that God might use, it's even more brilliant of him to arrange things from before time that all of it could work out, that cosmic things influence each other, or to make it all happen at just the right time. I think it's kind of cool. One thing we do have to account for is that earlier in Revelation, the stars represented angels. Like Jesus told us that. And so it could be that the stars here in this passage are talking about angels being displaced and brought to earth. When we're raptured, where are we going to end up? We'll see it in the next chapter, I think, before the throne of God, right? So the angels that are rebellious against God, I think, lose their spot, lose their access, we'll examine that a little bit more. But it could be that this is talking about angels being put to earth and in bondage there too. That fits with something a little bit later. Okay, so just a few little tidbits to think about. The moon is a pretty interesting thing in this verse, because it's a little bit of a clue about the timing of this sixth seal. Verse 12 says that it is a full moon. Well, it could mean that it's just fully visible from Earth, which I suppose maybe if there's, like, say, a volcanic eruption on Earth, it could reflect against the moon and cause it to look like blood. I think that's sort of a stretch. I think you'd have too much smoke in between you and it to be able to see. So I tend to think that the rapture happens on a full moon day. Interesting if you want to have your rapture practice once a month when the moon is full. Doesn't mean it can't. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah. There you go. Jump now. Yeah. Okay. So that would be on the 15th of a Jewish month that it would be a full moon every month. Yeah, I guess it could be a lunar eclipse, because that can make the moon look like it's blood red too. So it could happen during the time of a lunar eclipse. That's one reason people got excited about those eclipses that I mentioned last time, because the moon was turning red. But here's what we can really grasp. I've given you lots of ifs, but here's something that we can know for sure. There's only one other place in the whole Bible that this idea of a red moon actually shows up, and that is in Joel chapter 2. 31 and 32. I think this is describing the same events as the sixth seal things that are going on. Joel says, "The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said, and among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls." So I think this is just describing the same thing. It's the blood red moon is the first thing that kind of sets off the events that are the day of the Lord. Now, when the prophets talk about the day of the Lord, they're talking about a period has not yet happened when God will judge the earth. That's what the prophets always knew, and they use that phrase, and it's something yet future when God will judge the earth. So Joel is saying, when that moon is red, this is the onset of the day of the Lord. Well, when we look back at our sixth seal description, it says, the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? I think it's the same thing. It's our little clue that this is it, right? I don't know that we need to be watching for things. We're like, I think we're off here at this point. I'll give you a little bit more support of why I think we're not here for some of the events we'll be talking about, because there is even more, but I think that's pretty clear. So, yeah, it says that they'll call, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. I think this is talking about people who've already believed. We have called on the name of the Lord in our lives, right? So everyone's going to be saved here. At this point where the moon turns to blood and the day of the Lord begins. We're all going to be rescued here, okay? That word saved there is just loaded. And then it's talking about Israel. In Mount Zion and Jerusalem, there shall be those who escape. Escape is different than being saved, right? I'm going to say maybe this is Jewish people who come to believe after this event happens. I feel a little different about this now, don't you? And having met some dear people that I really want to have called on the name of the Lord. We just met some amazing people that my heart cares very much for that I didn't even know a couple weeks ago. But I think this is showing us that point in history, future history, where the Jewish people will begin to come back to God. to their maker, their God Yahweh. And so, and we're going to find he's doing something with Jewish people very next thing in this text. So it's pretty cool. So among the people who survive this event, God's going to call some of them. I think that's awesome. Okay. Do you think this is all fitting together? Like, I think it does. I think it used to just seem like this scattered, what can this book even mean? But I think it all fits, and it fits with these Old Testament passages. So, just to clarify and review just a little bit, in conjunction with the sixth seal, I think believers are getting new bodies and are being raptured. That either causes or coincides with something violent happening to the earth, a crustal shift, a polar shift, or something. All of the destruction could easily raise a cloud of dust or smoke or set off volcanoes and block the sun, or darkness could come as a result, because Joel talks about it being dark. I think stuff could block the sun, so it all looks dark. Yeah, so the official day of the Lord is immediately following this. I don't think it's a 24-hour day. I think the day of the Lord is a period of time. Maybe it's 7 years. I don't really care if it's not. It's a period of time, however long God wants it to be. I even think this event, if the earth really has a polar shift or crustal shift of some kind, that the days could be quickened. You know, the time that it takes for a day to pass could be shorter than it is now. I think there's so many ways it could go that are obscured to us now that I don't really think I need to pick one. Okay? So the very next thing, as we go into chapter 7, the very next thing that we see is the 144,000 Israelites being chosen. It just says there will be those whom the Lord calls in Joel. And now we're looking, next thing in the progression after our blood moon is God calling people. So it's another reason I think this all matches quite nicely. These are physical Israelites. They're called the sons of Israel. If these people were called the seed of Abraham, we'd have to wonder if we're talking about Christians, because the promises, spiritual promises to Abraham are given to the church. But the physical land promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is Israel, I think still remain. I think it even more after seeing the prosperity of Israel over the last couple of weeks, how much is growing, how technologically advanced they are. I think God is not done with this country yet. It seems pretty obvious to me. So I think this is talking about the Israelites when God chooses 144,000. It seems likely that their role is the same as what the prophets, like what John the Baptist did. The kingdom of God is at hand. Okay? The church has just been taken off, in my opinion, and I think God's choosing new ambassadors here. He's always kind. He always puts his word out. He always preaches truth to humans until it's finally too late. And there's still a little time left, so he's choosing new people to preach his message. Now it says they're chosen from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, but there's a few interesting things about the list that were given there in Revelation that I can't fully explain. I can only surmise a little bit. If you remember, there was no tribe called Joseph, right? A tribe of Joseph. The tribes were named after Manasseh and Ephraim, his two sons. And then it actually made 13 tribes because Jacob had 12 sons. But so when they went out of Egypt, there really were 13 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, right? Sometimes collectively referred to as Joseph. But Levi was that other one. Levi did not get a land inheritance. They were the ones God gave as an inheritance kind of to all his people to serve in the priestly duties. And so Levi, in sometimes, some ways that the lists go, was not considered one of the 12, or else we would call Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, we call Joseph. But in this list in Revelation 7, actually Levi is listed, and there's a tribe called Joseph listed there. Do you see it? That's kind of weird, isn't it? So, but Manasseh's there too. So it's Joseph and Manasseh, but Ephraim is not there. So I guess you could say, well, Ephraim's covered by Joseph. We can assign him that, I guess. But then the other one not mentioned is Dan. And that has led to a whole bunch of speculation about the tribe of Dan because they were extremely idolatrous. In fact, we visited. They were given a bit of land over like near the sea, but they failed to conquer the people who were there. And they ended up running away from those people and choosing a place much farther in the north, right up near Mount Hermon where the Watchers came down. This is in enemy territory. It was beautiful and lush and lots of water, and it was one of my favorite days. We did a beautiful nature hike up there, loved it. But they picked a land that was better to them than the land that God gave them. And so highly disobedient and rejecting Yahweh's plan for them, okay? So Dan's left off this list for some reason, which is just, wow, I wonder what that even means. But sometimes biblical writers will do this. It bothers us because we want to be exact. We want to write our histories with exactness, but it didn't bother them at all in the way they kept their histories, just to keep it to an even 12 to be symbolic. So it could have just been one of those things where they're trying to keep it to 12. Yes?
Wait, but doesn't that, do you see any correlation with the disciples where Judas breaks away and then they vote to make it 12 complete? I mean, that just sounds like the exact same.
It sounds like a similar, definitely a similar event. Yeah, that's a good observation. I hadn't really thought of that, but yeah. God, in choosing 12 and then 12 apostles, God is clearly trying to say all people. So that's really what we're trying to get at, is this is from all of Israel, okay? All right, so these 144,000 Israelites are sealed on their foreheads, and this appears to be a gesture that offers protection for them for the judgments that are coming, so that they're protected. Because it says that God's judgment is held back until the sealing job is done. Now, sealing you on the forehead is like really foreign to our culture. We've never, like, that would be weird if I just went up and stuck stuff on your forehead, right? That would just be like, what in the world are you talking about? But this isn't odd to them. Let's look back at Ezekiel chapter 9. Remember, if there's something weird in Revelation, let's see if there's something in the Old Testament. It says, "Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub on which it rested to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed in linen who had the writing case at his waist. And the Lord said to him, 'Pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it.'" So it's the guys who are sad about Israel's idolatry and who wish Israel had been faithful to God. It's those, we're those ones in our culture, aren't we? Look at how bad our culture's getting. Look how much people are turning away from God. Right? So there were guys then who felt that way about their own country and land and people, okay? So they're getting sealed on their forehead. "And to the others he said in my hearing, 'Pass through the city after him and strike. Your eye shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. Kill old men outright, young men and maidens, little children and women, but touch no one on whom is the mark. And begin at my sanctuary.' So they began with the elders who were before the house." So it's the sealing on the forehead is a mark of protection because God is about to judge. And God is choosing to preserve certain ones that he has chosen, even as he judges. This makes you even think of Passover a little bit, doesn't it? You have the mark on the house. You have to be in the house to be rescued from the judgment that's coming. Hey, same God, similar pictures, wants us to get this spiritual lesson that we need to belong to him, right? Okay, so after these people are sealed, these 144,000, John's vision now switches scenes, and he starts to see something that's going on in heaven. So my opinion here is that we saw on earth what was happening at the sixth seal, right? All this catastrophe stuff. And then we saw that these people are chosen and sealed on their foreheads. And then John, I think, this is what's going on simultaneously in heaven at this time. He looks up and he gets a glimpse of what just happened there. And this is what he sees. "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number." It's that big. "From every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages." Oh, what are those words? The church, okay? "Standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.'" I think we're seeing what just happened when we got taken off and rescued and brought before the throne room of God. Interestingly, if it does happen on a full moon, there's a festival that's on the full moon, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. That's the one with all the leafy palm branches and stuff. Interesting. Just a little thing to put in your back pocket. If I had to pick a festival, this is why I would pick that one. That would coincide with the rapture. But it doesn't have to be. It's just an idea, okay? So they're crying out. How are they relating to God now? Salvation. You really rescue. You've rescued us. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen! Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might. He's like trying to cram in as many words as they can, right? Be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Do you see what is happening here? For the very first time ever in all of history, the church is assembled, past and present, the whole entire believing body. Remember we said the church is why God made the earth in the first place? To get a body to live in, to get a bride for his son. Here is the bride standing there for the first time. Jesus gets to look out and see his girl. Okay? He's introduced to the bride for the very first time. Can you imagine what that will be like to be Jesus standing there seeing us there? Okay. Remember that John was, at least as far as we know, he was not given any previous revelation about the rapture. He didn't really know anything about it as far as I can tell before this. And so he's pretty confused about what he's seeing. So, it goes on like this. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, Sir, you know. He's like, how should I know? I think that's how it would say it if he spoke English. How should I know? You do, tell me. And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Okay, so this is saying, he's explaining to John, these are the ones who've come out of the Great Tribulation. Now, it may sound to you like that means they came out of the middle of the Great Tribulation. That is why preachers say that this is tribulation martyrs here, because it says out of the Great Tribulation. Now, first of all, that phrase, Great Tribulation, does not have to mean that last 3.5 years of a 7-year period that's a little bit contrived. Do you think that anybody on the earth during that 6th seal event where every mountain and island have been removed would say that this was a time of great tribulation? Yes. It means they're coming away from something really bad. They're coming out of something really bad. Okay? And that word out of, they are the ones coming out of. That Greek word is a preposition which is extremely flexible. It could very well mean away from. They're coming away from this horrible thing that's happening on the earth. They're the ones that have just been rescued away from this bad thing. It does not mean that you have to create a 7-year period, somewhere in the middle of it, you say these people are pulled off, okay? Or that they died, really is what people say. These are people who've died. Furthermore, I don't think there's going to be a multitude as far as the eye can see of people who believe in Christ after, like during the tribulation and through the whole Antichrist thing and that are brought here. It also doesn't fit with the chronology at all, because we don't see persecution under the Antichrist for several more chapters of Revelation. So if we are going chronologically, which I think so far you see it's working, right? It doesn't work for this to be people who die during the last 7 years of human history. I think what we're seeing here is the church. They've been brought away from, they've been rescued like Lot, away from Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? I did a little word study on that preposition to make sure that I'm telling you correctly, and it's absolutely very, very flexible. I'm not making this up or stretching at all to say that it doesn't have to mean come out of the middle of, okay? So we're good. Okay, so even though what I'm telling you is a relatively recent interpretation of the timing of events of Revelation and how they fit together, being at the 6th seal, but with the seals already opened, so it can be the next thing. The 6th seal can be the very next thing that happens on earth, right? We don't know when that will happen. It's relatively new, but I think maybe God revealed this at our time because we're coming up to it. And, you know, it doesn't matter that scholars before didn't figure it out. I actually read it first in a book called Red Moon Rising that I've given you the background for. You can read that book for free online. It's in the footnote there. And I just think it's a really, really exciting and coherent way to look at it. It allows us to remain pre-trib while acknowledging that, you know, certain events happen in correlation with others. So I don't want you to get too distracted that, okay, here's a new idea and here's how all these things have to fit together. I want you to focus for a minute on this paragraph. It's verses 15 to 17. talking more about these ones who have been brought before the throne of God. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. That's beautiful. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd. Isn't that interesting? The Lamb is the shepherd. He's one of us. He's still a human forever, Jesus is. Did you know that? In a glorified body, human forever. The Lamb is the shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That is what's in store for us. So even as things get complex in your minds, and I'm giving you so much information, come back to this. Look at these promises. Do not let these promises go very long in your life before you read them again. These are really, really incredible things to grasp. So yeah, I love to think about how it will be for Jesus. That has really put motivation into my life to live. What can I even say? I could guilt you into all the things you don't do. But we can say, hey, let's think about Jesus seeing his bride right there in front of him and go, I'm in that group. I want to be who he wants me to be out of love. I adore him. I want to be like him. I have a song to play for you. This is another one of my favorite songs. This is also Chris Rice that I played for you last time, and this is just a beautiful little song. Go ahead. No, I love it. We saw in Jerusalem one day, we saw this procession of bar mitzvah family groups coming. Like it was one after the other after the other. The whole Wailing Wall area was just filled with people because it was bar mitzvah day. And they would come and they'd have these chuppahs with a little 13-year-old boy walking under him, and there's 4 brothers or people would, be alongside his whole family around. There'd be a clarinetist, sometimes definitely a drummer, sometimes a trumpet or saxophone, and each little group is like, yay! I mean, it was celebration like I'd never seen, just uninhibited. It was amazing. And so we'd watch this one go by, and this boy looking awkward because he's all the attention today. My boy's 13, so I could totally see him there. And then you'd see other families. Once they did their little thing, they would just be dancing, and so the boy would be on the dad's shoulders. I just thought, we don't know how to celebrate anymore. And I was thinking of this song about one day we're going to get there. It just totally makes me want to grab your hands and be in a circle and, and do it. But I can't wait. I can't wait for this moment. It's going to be joy. I know you think you're so bad and that you've done so much that deserves shame and all of that, but oh my goodness, do you guys realize when we're with him in his presence, we have the white robes and we have joy. And it's going to be a dance. It's going to be a celebration, not shame. Okay? Look forward to this moment. This is what this is the moment that we see him for the first time. I love it. Okay, well, I want to, for the rest of our time, spin off of some of this. We're going to go back to the Old Testament in a couple different places, and we're going to see how I think the best possible explanation I've found of how certain events might line up together when it comes to what might be happening in the world at the time that this event happens for us. So I do think that nobody will know the rapture date, and if you do know it, don't tell anyone kind of thing, We talked about that before. But you know that I believe that when Jesus said no one knows the day or the hour, he wasn't talking about the rapture there. He was talking about the return, the final return. He wasn't talking to the church. So I do tend to suspect that we could look at world events and have an idea that it could be like really, really close. Now I could be totally wrong on these connections that I'm making here, but you can see for yourselves that a lot of the wording lines up. And so the honest truth of it is the things I'm about to show you for our last 25 minutes together make me think, like each time that there's a festival or that, this could be the rapture or whatever, make me think probably not. Because I don't see this stuff yet. But I could totally be wrong, and it could be tomorrow, and whatever. But there are some very interesting connections of other Old Testament passages, and I think it's a really good exercise for me to take you to those places and show you maybe some unfamiliar parts of the Bible. We can all stand to learn some of that sometimes too, right? Especially when you're talking in conjunction to the rapture, we've got now our curiosity, we've got our desire all built in, and if this makes you, want to study the Word, then I've succeeded. Okay, if it makes you set rapture dates, I'm in big trouble and I should quit. Okay. All right. Well, there's a conflict prophesied in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. It's often referred to as the Gog-Magog War. And it involves several nations attacking Israel. What's curious about the list of nations there is they don't seem to include the ones that are immediately around it. Around Israel. Kathy and I stood at the border of Lebanon and the border of Syria. You could see this fence just, 100 yards away, maybe 200? Yeah, from where we were standing was Syria. Okay, that's how close Israel is to some really powerful enemies, okay? But we're not talking about those nations. We're talking about ones that are further out in the span. And so people make lists of these using their modern day names. One common list is that these nations are Russia, Iran, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Turkey, Germany, Armenia, and some of the Baltic countries. I actually don't think you can support any of that very well. Especially Russia is seen as the main one in this conflict, and I've come to think that may not be correct at all. So to me, I don't really want to even mess with trying to identify them. But just to give you an idea, they aren't the ones right around Israel, okay? And that'll become important in a little bit. But when we look at the Ezekiel 38 and 39 passage, which is something you may want to read on your own later, the term "that day" is used a lot. This is one example. That is the day of which I have spoken. So several times in this passage, at least 3, God is defining this conflict as like that day. He's saying it's that day, the one I talked about, you know? So I think that gives us this little bit of, this is happening as an end times event before the return of Christ. Now remember, Joel 2:31 said, that blood red moon was the day of the Lord. And so now Ezekiel's telling us, this is that day that I've spoken of. So I think right here we're talking about the same time period. Here's what Joel said, just to remind you, the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. We're talking about end times things, in my opinion. You will read, some people think this has already happened in the past. I don't know how you can read those 2 chapters and think it's all entirely completed forever and done. I don't know how you do that. Especially this terminology about it's that day that I've talked about, right? He's putting it in a particular time. So the description is in Ezekiel 38, especially verse 20, is really, really similar to the description of the 6th seal, those events that we talked about. So let me show you a comparison. They each give some different details, but there's some things that are commonalities. So here's Ezekiel's version of this. The fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep on the ground and all the people who are on the face of the earth, everyone. He even included the animals. He added that detail. All the animals, everything, shall quake at my presence. And the mountains shall be thrown down and the cliffs shall fall. It's the same, isn't it? And every wall shall tumble to the ground. I think he's talking here about the 6th seal in Ezekiel. Let's look back at Revelation just so you can compare. The sky vanished like a scroll that had been rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone slave and free hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who's seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? So I've given you a little comparison chart so you can see which details are in which passage. They're not all in every one, but you get the idea how they correlate with each other. The important thing is all people on the earth are afraid of God in both passages, right? Everyone, which means to me there's no believers here at this point. Now in Ezekiel chapter 38, one of the methods that God uses to destroy these armies that are trying to invade Israel is hailstones, fire, and sulfur. That's found in verse 22 of chapter 38. Now if we would look ahead in Revelation, which we're not going to be there today, we're going to find out as we start to see the trumpet judgments starting to happen. These are God's judgments on earth now. The first one is hail and fire mixed with blood. So we have, let's look at it, okay? With pestilence and bloodshed I will enter into judgment with him, and I will rain upon him and his hordes and the many peoples who are with him, torrential rains and hailstones, fire and sulfur. That's on this guy named Gog. Then in Revelation 8:7, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. I don't think I'm stretching it to say those look like the same thing. Okay? So I'm suggesting that the Gog-Magog war correlates, like the rapture happens during it, and then these enemies are finally destroyed with the hail, fire, and blood, with the first trumpet judgment, which is what comes next sequentially. So it just works to me logically here, okay? So you can look at the overlap here that I have in your chart. Now, because we've shown these similarities, it's interesting. We maybe would want to look at some more clues in these couple of chapters to say, well, how can we find out kind of when this is happening, or if it's happening now, or anything like that. So Ezekiel 38 verses 8 and 9 say this: after many days you will be mustered. In the latter years you will go against the land that is restored from war, the land whose people were gathered from many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual waste. Its people, sorry, what's that? Did we get lost? Okay. Okay, so this land had been a continual waste, but now its people have returned from other countries, okay? Its people were brought out from the peoples and now dwell securely, all of them. You will advance. He's talking to this leader named Gog. Coming on like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your hordes and many peoples with you. Okay, so if you want to visualize this as Putin, as many people do, that's your business. I don't think we can be that specific. I actually think Gog is a spiritual entity, one of those sons of God who is given authority over a certain region. Because later on in Revelation, we're going to find another Gog-Magog conflict that's later, I believe. And so I think what we're talking about is a spiritual entity who entices his people to come and attack Israel. And so they're going against this land that's restored from war. So they've had a war recently, and now they're all restored from that. There are people who've been gathered from many nations. Oh, that's what's happened with Israel in the last 100 years. Interesting. So in some ways, this could be where Israel is right now. It was pretty safe when we were there. A lot of people think they're more secure than they've ever been because they have such a powerful military. Others think that this hasn't happened yet. That Israel, because there's so many threats still against Israel, that they're not living in security just yet. So that'll depend on your interpretation. But this is what he says to Gog. You will come out from your place out of the uttermost parts of the north, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great host, a mighty army. Now I think that's unusual if we're talking about modern times, because armies don't really ride horses nowadays. So a couple options. Maybe Ezekiel didn't know how to describe army tanks and things that he saw in his vision and called them horses. Or maybe something has to happen on earth to set things back a ways so that people are using horses instead of tanks. I suppose the events of the Sixth Seal and the catastrophes involved in that could disable armies and cause them to go back in time in their warfare and be on horses. Also, just there are some parts of the world that prefer warfare on horseback and so I guess it's possible that you'd still have armies riding horses. I don't know. But it's just something to ponder. It's different than what we'd expect in modern times. And then this too has kind of a weirdness to me. Chapter 39. Then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and make fires of the weapons and burn them. Shields and bucklers, bow and arrows, clubs and spears. And they will make fires of them for 7 years, so that they will not need to take wood out of the field or cut down any of the forests, for they will make fires of their weapons. So again, that doesn't fit modern times to me. We don't use those things that would be burnable. It doesn't say they're going emptying the gas tanks of the tanks that got disabled there, and they're burning, gasoline for fuel. It says they're burning the weapons. And it says they're burning them for 7 years. That's interesting when we think of the possibility of the tribulation lasting 7 years. This says to me, because I don't think this has been fulfilled yet, that we have at least 7 years until the final return of Christ as king over Israel, right? So yeah, I just think it's very interesting that we're talking about wood weapons. I think something's obscured here that I don't yet understand, but maybe one of you will have insight into that and I can teach it better next year. But another interesting timing clue here in 39, 14, and 15. They will set apart men to travel through the land regularly and bury those travelers remaining on the face of the land so as to cleanse it. At the end of 7 months, they will make their search. And when these travel through the land and anyone sees a human bone, then he shall set up a sign by it till the buriers have buried it in the valley of Hamon Gog. That just sounds like there's something radioactive that people don't want to touch it. And so they flag it, and then the people come by with their hazmat suits and recover the, So I can see that being modern. I think that's really interesting. I don't know if that's how you should look at it, but it's so detailed, isn't it? That this is the kind of destruction that it'll be, that they wait 7 months for some reason before they start identifying the remains. Maybe it's to let it all decay because there's so much death that it would be disgusting to clean it up until wait for them to all turn to bones because that'll be easier. I don't know. And then to even, like, every last one has to be picked up. That's just interesting to me. It really raises more questions than answers, some of these things. But then we have that timing clue about this is that day, the day of the Lord. He says it, I think, 3 times. But on that day, the day that Gog shall come against the land of Israel, declares the Lord God, my wrath will be roused in my anger on that day. And then this is followed by that verse about the earthquake and the destruction and everybody crying out against God. That I think is the 6th seal of Revelation. And then he says this verse 39:8, like we saw, behold, it is coming, and it will be brought about, declares the Lord God. That is the day of which I have spoken. Many times he's spoken about this day. Okay? Now I skipped a section in there. I was kind of bopping around already, but there's a section I skipped that I just want to bring to your attention. I think I might not have done this last year, so this might be new for you. I'd just like to raise this for your attention. I've never heard anybody talk about it except one guy in that email group with that author that I mentioned, okay? This is his idea, giving him credit. Verses 10 to 13 of Ezekiel 38 say this, thus says the Lord God, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. This is Gog he's talking to. And say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will fall upon the quiet people who dwell securely, all of them dwelling without walls and having no bars or gates, to seize spoil and carry off plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places that are now inhabited, and the people who were gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell at the center of the earth. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all its leaders will say to you, have you come to seize spoil? Have you assembled your hosts to carry off plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to seize great spoil? So there's all these questions. Why are you doing this? Right? And so I think that what may be happening here is a simultaneous invasion of a different country at the time that Gog and his hordes are invading Israel. Because when God refers to Israel, he often calls them my people or my land, but this is not talking about God's people and God's land. It also said that God's causing Gog to invade Israel. It's like he's putting a hook in his jaw, is what it says in Ezekiel 38. This is God's idea for Gog to come against Israel because God's going to show his judgment on him, right, and end it. But this particular incident here from 10 to 13 this is an evil scheme that comes into Gog's mind. This isn't the same as the Lord God drawing the armies to Israel. This is something different, perhaps, because God's plan isn't an evil scheme, right? And so I think we have something perhaps simultaneously going on here because his thoughts are called evil. Ezekiel 38:16 gives us this one I told you about. This is God's idea against Israel. You will come up against my people Israel like a cloud covering the land. In the latter days I will bring you against my land, that the nations may know me, when through you, O Gog, I vindicate my holiness before their eyes. So the Israel attack is God's idea to vindicate himself. This other part is an evil scheme. I think it's two different things. And the other thing is the world seems really, really perplexed about why this other land is being attacked. Is it to seize the spoil? Why are you doing this? You saw how many questions were in there, right? Do you think when the nations attack Israel, anyone's going to be asking why they're doing that? They've been doing that since its existence. They're trying to wipe it off the map. Everybody hates them. They're trying to push them into the sea. They say it all the time. So no one's going to say, oh, have you come to seize spoil? Why are you doing this? No, they're coming because they hate them, okay? So the whole very questions about why you're doing this, why the nations are saying, hey, what's going on? Why are you doing that? You know, makes me think this is talking about perhaps something else. And so if Israel gets invaded, no one's going to wonder that. Well, the land mentioned is known as a land of unwalled villages. Have you ever been to other countries where everything is gated and walled? Okay, and then you come home and you see all of our lawns and all of our, okay, it looks really different here. Okay, a quiet people who dwell securely. We rely on our military. We think we're pretty safe, right? A people having lots of livestock and goods. A land located at the center of the earth. That one throws me. The center of the earth is the Israelites would have thought that about themselves. So for a Jewish man, Ezekiel, to be calling something the center of the earth, that throws me off because he might have thought about Israel there. But you could think of a country that is at the center of world power, that has a lot of authority and power over other parts of the world. I guess you could call that the center of the earth. We're talking about a people who've been gathered from the nations. That's their country. The country is made up of people that have come from all the nations. Are you starting to think anything about what this country could be? It's just a little bit odd, isn't it? Okay, so prophecy teachers are always saying the United States is not in biblical prophecy. We don't see it in the book of Revelation. We don't see anything about how such a powerful country gets disabled because it's not in Revelation, right? I wonder if this is talking about how we get disabled right here, is that we're attacked simultaneously to this invasion of Israel, and therefore we can't help them, and God takes care of it for them. I'm not trying to scare you. Oh, there's going to be an invasion of America. Get ready. I'm not trying to get you to do that. What I'm presenting it because, well, first of all, it seems kind of like it might be there. But secondly, if it does happen, if America should have some kind of surprise attack that really cripples or disables us, I'll tell you what, I'm going to be thinking we're about on the Gog-Magog thing, and this is it. Because of these ties to the rapture, right? So I hope that gives you just this little glimmer, if this should happen, that we are people who can have our heads about us. Instead of freaking out with everybody else and going, oh no, how are we going to survive? How are we going to, we can be those people that go, hey, hang on, because, bring people together, help each other, all of that, because the wait probably isn't going to be very long. All right? That's what I think about. If the scenario is correct, that's where we're going to be at that point. And that's why I say, I think we might have an idea when the rapture's coming. We might have some dominoes that fall ahead of it that we go, this is interesting. Okay, so it says that Israel will be living in safety at this time. Not the section about the place of the unwalled villages, but it does say his land, Israel, they'll be living in safety. And so some prophecy teachers think that in order for Israel to be in safety, they have to own the lands immediately around them. They'll expand before this Gog-Magog thing ever happens. And they pull in one other conflict that is prophesied that has not yet happened and kind of put this as a first domino kind of thing, that this conflict would have to happen first. So let me point you to Isaiah 17. As you probably know, the main city of Syria is Damascus. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city on the earth. There's never been a time since it was founded that there haven't been people living there. It has never been fully destroyed. And yet Isaiah says this, an oracle concerning Damascus, behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. And then he says later in the chapter, at evening time, behold, terror. Before morning, they are no more. This is the portion of those who loot us and the lot of those who plunder us. So it says Damascus will cease to be a city. That has not happened yet. Okay? And it also says that the destruction happens in one night. I don't think that could have ever happened in the past. But when you think about nukes or whatever, that could easily happen in a night. Now it's clear from the verses 4 to 7 of Isaiah 17 that Israel is going to suffer greatly from this attack. There will be a remnant, but there's loss. So let's read this little section. And in that day the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean. And it shall be as when the reaper gathers standing grain, and his arm harvests the ears, and as when one gleans the ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Gleanings will be left in it, as when an olive tree is beaten 2 or 3 berries in the top of the highest bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruit tree, declares the Lord God of Israel. And that day, man will look to his maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. So here we see this little, Israel's going to be coming back to God. They're going to be looking back to their maker, to their God, but after pain, right? There's not going to be a whole huge lot of them left. And it's in conjunction with this destruction of Damascus. If it weren't for that Damascus detail, I would have thought that this was the Holocaust. You know, all of those things that led Israel, or even the wars of statehood in the 1967, where they've suffered loss but come back, right? But they haven't yet turned to God yet either through that. So it seems to me that this still has to happen, and that this could happen tomorrow, for all I know. And I don't know how long between this one and the Gog-Magog onset. I think it could be weeks, maybe months, maybe a few years. But remember the Gog-Magog passage said, that they're a nation recovering from war. And I just wonder if this is potentially the war that they're recovering from. So it's just an interesting potential sequence of events to consider. So I gave you like a little timeline. I don't know if you see it there I think you have this in your notes, right? Okay, so you can look at how I've kind of laid this out for you. On one hand, I hate people's timelines, but just to help you get straight what I've been trying to communicate as potentially what's going on. So we have John's vision looking back to Jesus' death, right? He's seeing the transfer of the old covenant to the new one. Jesus ascends to heaven and begins to open the seals because now he's the Lamb that's worthy. And then we'd have all kinds of time going by while the seals 1 through 5 are opened and are progressing. And then in 1948, we had the dry bones coming to life. That would be Israel's statehood. At some point, we have the Isaiah 17. I didn't mention Psalm 83, but it seems to correlate with Isaiah 17, and it mentions the nations that are immediately surrounding Israel. So they're involved in this conflict, okay? So they suffer some loss, but then they regain. And then a little time passes, and then we have Ezekiel 38, 39 conflict. Somewhere in there is that 6th seal event, and then somewhere after that is the first trumpet, which ends that Gog-Magog invasion, okay? So that would be my best guess at how these events go together. Does that mean I know when the rapture is? No. Really, this whole thing raises 2 questions that I want to address real quick as the last thing we do today. First, does this mean that we should be excited if and when Damascus gets destroyed, because it means that the Gog-Magog war and the rapture may be near? The second thing, does this mean Jesus can't return until sometime after we see Damascus destroyed? Those cross your mind a little bit? Okay, if I gave you long enough to think without continuing to talk, you would have wondered these things, okay? So when we phrase the first one this way, I hope it's just really obvious that we should never, ever, ever be longing for the destruction of a whole city full of unbelieving people, right? Oh my goodness, that will be a horrible, horrible day for the world, no matter how it happens or who does it when Damascus gets destroyed. You know, I definitely look forward to the rapture, and I know God's judgment correlates with his rescue, but let's keep holding these things in tension, that our rescue is destruction for others, and so we're not to be eager for that, right? Okay, both. It's both things. This will be very bad, but it also, there will be a measure of, holy cow, this is happening as Isaiah said. That will be an interesting day for us as believers to see that prophecy be fulfilled to the T, okay? So can you see how you can have some excitement, but also, ugh, okay. And then the second one, does this mean Jesus can't return until sometime after that happens? Well, no, because I might be wrong, right? This is just one way of putting forth connecting the dots. Maybe I have the dots wrong, and so I just want to have the humility to say that and say, hey, let's always live lives that expect Christ any day, right? In fact, Paul commended people for that. He said in 1 Thessalonians 1, 9 and 10, for they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you Thessalonians, turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. So the Thessalonians were commended for waiting for Jesus to come. They were eager for it. They were looking forward to it. They were thinking about it. Okay? So to be eager for that is a good thing that Paul would commend us for too. All right, so next week we're going to go back to Revelation. I know I departed from it for a little bit here to give you the prophets. But we're going to pick up in chapter 8, and we're going to continue to be sobered by the wrath of God. But we're also going to rejoice because there's some details he's going to wrap up here that are pretty interesting and exciting. Okay? Let me pray, and then you can leave if you need to, and you can ask questions if you have them and want to stay a little longer, all right? Lord, I know that I just dumped these poor people with all kinds of stuff that is going to take them longer to sort through. But I pray that as they leave this room that they'll really be gripped by that vision of being with you, of being around your throne. Because that's really, for us, the thing we most look forward to. It's what we're made for, is to be in fellowship with you. We just can't wait to have our sin natures gone and to stand there in those white robes and be clean and stop worrying so much about whether we're doing enough or doing the right things, or stop feeling ashamed of the wrong things we do. We want to be pure before you, and we want to see your face. We want to be in relationship with you on a deeper level than we can have right now in this broken place. We want to see you as King of Kings over your earth, and have everybody recognize who you are instead of this state of deception that everything is in. And so we tell you together that we are your people, your dearly loved children, and we love you back. And we look forward to that day of restoration above all things. It's in the name of Jesus that we ask for it and pray that it will be soon. Amen.